Welcome to reInvent 2022. Thank you for joining us. I know there's 1,000 other places, literally 1,000 other places you can be tonight or this afternoon, and we're so glad you're here with us. Today I'm going to be joined by a couple of my colleagues, and we are going to speak about a geographic perspective about responsible AI. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to start getting on the same page, getting a definition of responsible AI and ML. I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we at AWS engage with our customers to help them on their responsible AI journey. I'm going to have our customer and friend, Christina Pombo, come up and talk about responsible AI in Latin America and the Caribbean and what her is doing to help their customers and their partners. Finally, Chris Howard will come up and speak to you a little bit about responsible AI in Australia and give you a little bit of a preview of what's to come. And then finally, we're going to save at least 10 minutes at the end for questions. So there will be a mic at the front of the room, and we would love to hear your questions. We will have all three of us here to answer. So let's begin, shall we? So, responsible AI. The definition that we use is it's an organizational structure with principles and practice that support the design, build, and operations of AI systems that maximize benefit while minimizing risks and unintended impact. Now, I think we all know that there are some times that AI can be used in ways that are not responsible. And for companies that do that, it can start with loss of customer trust, which we all know is not a good thing, and it can go all the way to criminal charges and legislative issues and actually breaking of laws in whatever country you're in. So, upside as well. So, in an effort to go beyond just tooling and technology, we here at AWS have come up with a responsible AI framework. And that framework is an attempt to provide a model for customers to begin to answer the questions about responsible AI. How do we start? How do we operationalize these responsible practice into our AI and ML models so we get that maximum benefit? We really want to take you from principles to practice on your responsible AI journey. And if you heard the leadership presentation yesterday with Dia Nguyen and Aileen Smith, we talked about how responsible AI is not an outcome. It's not a destination, it's really a journey. And how we pull ourselves together and the way we put those principles together into practice really is very impactful. So I am part of a team that works alongside with our customers to actually put these skills into play in your teams. We take a very high-touch approach, and we help you develop really wherever you are on that journey. And finally, this is not a technology problem, right? Responsible AI is a multi-dimensional problem that needs to be solved with a number of the teams, from your C-suite to your data scientists, to the people that collect the data, to the people that decide even if ML is the right technology to use to solve your problem. It's about technology, people, and process. So, I talked about our responsible AI framework. And here's what we've come up with. It's a 7-pillar framework. You'll probably recognize it if you've done any research on responsible AI. We have followed some certain principles you might have seen in the OECD and other organizations that are really focusing on responsible AI, because really there is no one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to responsible AI. So let's start at the top. When we look at this is a holistic framework about how you put these AI and ML models into place. We start at the top with value alignment. So it doesn't matter what my opinions are or my values. What matters is your organization and the values that you espouse to your community, to your customers, and to the market. So we work with you to understand how you build those systems and align them with your values. And if those two things are aligned, that's a great place to start. I mentioned that we work with different companies across their journeys. Some places have not even come up with a principle statement. We can help them develop that. Some places have a principle statement and just need to understand how to get them into practice. It's really a spectrum. and we have this framework to help you move along. So if you look around the left side, I call these our people and process pillars. So let's start with inclusion. So inclusion is doing the intentional work to have multiple voices sitting around the table. It's not just about gender or race. It's about lived experiences and about your interaction with AI and ML and what experience you have and how you bring it to the table. I mentioned a little bit earlier, sometimes ML is not the right tool to solve a problem. But if you don't have the right voices around the table, you might not get to that conclusion. So inclusion, very important in our teams as we're building these models that we want to be responsible. Next, training and education. That really tightly aligns with the next pillar, accountability. But we talk about having training and education at the right level, the right teams. So everyone needs to understand, not just the data scientists, what they're doing. Everyone needs to understand how the responsible AI plays across your models, how to explain it, why it's being used. So we offer training and education at all levels of your organization to ensure that you are operationalizing the right things with your AI and ML. On the people and process side is accountability. You can't be held accountable if you don't understand what you're working with. So as I mentioned, that ties really well with our training and education piece. Accountability is having a human in the loop and really maintaining that control over the system. We don't believe it's right to have a system just run amok. We believe that humans make decisions and computers make predictions. So having that human in the loop to understand the outcomes is very important. When you look at the right side of the slide, these are more technology pillars, right? So these are problems that can be solved with the help of AWS technologies and other technologies that are available open source or whatever you choose to use in your models. So we start with privacy and security. It's not only about keeping the data private, that's pretty much a table stake, right? It's also using it in the way it was intended. If it was gathered in a certain way, is it being used in that way? And make sure you're ensuring that data is secure and private. Secondly, bias and fairness. When we build these models, we want to make sure that there's no unintended impact, and if we minimize that bias and minimize that risk, that is the key to making sure these models are responsible. And finally, transparency and explainability. So there are many tools that you can use out in the market that help you with this, but this is really where you're able to understand and explain to another human how this model made that decision. So we take all these frameworks, we take this framework and we use it with our customers to help them understand how they can truly operationalize and truly to make the best use of this AI and ML and get the best possible business outcome, minimizing bias and minimizing risk. I would like to invite our customer, Christina Pombo, representing the IDB, for a view of responsible AI from Latin America and the Caribbean. Christina?
Thank you very much, Rebecca. So I think after what Rebecca presented, I don't need to make the argument to this crowd of artificial intelligence having the potential to improve or to make our lives better in a lot of things, improving education, the quality of education, or provide better jobs, or even improve the efficiency of healthcare systems. But before it does that, we must ensure it is implemented ethically and responsible without increasing inequality gaps. As Rebecca said, my name is Cristina Pombo. I work at the Inter-American Development Bank, which is a financial institution that provide loans to governments in Latin America and the Caribbean, loans for development projects. That's why I'm giving more importance to inequality and to close inequality gaps and using technology in an ethical way. So since the discussion of artificial intelligence and automated decision systems started, a lot of governments in the region started to show interest in this and started to use data from their citizens to create those ADS. And since AI will become, or it's becoming increasingly accessible and more widely used in our day-to-day life, and this kind of big events attest to that, there's concerns, and there's concerns that Rebecca just mentioned before, over bias, automation, human safety, which could add to those historical, social, and economic inequalities. So therefore, at the IDB, at the bank, we create the initiative that is called FAIRLAC. We partner with allies such as Amazon Web Services to promote the use and adoption of a trustworthy AI and decision support system. What we want to do is, if governments or entrepreneurs start using these systems, we want to ensure they have the right tools to implement it in an ethical way. And people tend to think that AI is far away from the region, that Latin America and the Caribbean is not working about AI, but that's not entirely true. Think about the potential that Latin America and the Caribbean have. That region, as we call it, LAC, covers vast territories, from Mexico to Bahamas, from Argentina to Chile. The region has a population of over 700 million people as of 2019, with a GDP as of 2020 calculated in $4.7 trillion. That is roughly about 20% of the US GDP. So standing for a fantastic opportunity. And I'm sure we all agree that this technology is very relevant, but the region has long been the victim of low productivity. I don't know how much do you know about Latin American and the Caribbean, but with the COVID-19 pandemic, things were really worse, and the region has the long school closes during the pandemic, where the majority of the jobs were lost if compared with other regions in the world. So a lot of the countries now are thinking that this technology is a great chance for the region's economies to leapfrog to more significant innovation and economic progress. Some research, and I think it is a report from the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, that points that the region could gain or could add a percentage point of its GDP in 5 of the most biggest countries if artificial intelligence is used wisely. Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, and Peru. And that's a lot. So governments are asking, okay, how we can do it, and entrepreneurs are also asking how we can do it. And let me tell you that while I quickly fell in love with the world of AI and the social good this technology can do, when I was reading a lot of it and started researching a lot of it, I started seeing that the old saying that not all that glitters is gold holds true, specifically when it comes to bias and ethical challenges. There's a lot of risk involved in the life cycle of the AI, not only while developing the model, but since the collection of the data, starting from that point, there's a lot of risk embedded there. So AI can boost the region's public and private sector, for sure. But policymakers and business leaders must take advantage while preventing potential downsides. And there's a lot of advantage and good things happening. Let me give you one example from the region so you can see how are the things that are happening there. Uruguay, it's a little country in the southern part of Latin America. And they developed, with a startup and with the help of FAIRLAC at the bank, they developed a model to prevent high school dropouts. Despite achieving universal coverage in primary education, many Uruguayan students repeat their grades. So these high repetition rates generate school backwardness, and as of 6th grade, more or less, many students are overage. So to solve the issue, the government partnered with a startup, and they created an early warning system using AI, which analyzes students' data and academic offerings. And with all the information gathered, they were able to alert the school when any student was a risk to drop out. That could be a game changer. So there has a lot of risk, but there's a lot of good things happening there. That's what I'm saying, that we need to be really extremely careful when making these decisions. As Rebecca presented, using artificial intelligence in decision-making systems has associated vulnerabilities to the lives of the people that are, of the users or the affected population. Vulnerabilities such as model extraction or bad use of data, or bad data used for feed the model or getting into the training set that could affect the model's output. And the ones that are using the ADS or that are developing the models need to be intentional on what they want to do with the model, and need to be intentional in the way they are using the data. It's not because the data is there, I can use it, or I should use it. It's why I'm using it, why I'm using this type of technology. Is getting a little bit deeper in the questions we are making and the issues we try to solve. In recent years, we have seen the proliferation of frameworks to guide the ethical use of artificial intelligence, of decision-making systems, from governments to big tech companies to international organizations such as the OECD, as Rebecca said, or UNESCO, for example. They all have developed their own set of principles to allegedly guide the trustworthy AI development. And some, as Amazon Web Services, have developed tools, concrete tools, to bring that theory closer. And that's very important to start. It's not only about the theory and about the big principles of, okay, do not harm. That's great. But you, as a developer or a policymaker, can make that thing a reality. At a regional level, at the IDP, and with partners as AWS, we created a set of tools, and a set of tools in Spanish and in Portuguese, because a lot of things are happening in English. We conducted a very interesting exercise before the pandemic, using listening tools to see what was the conversation about when you put artificial intelligence. In English, the conversation was about privacy. I think it was maybe it was because of the GDPR was happening, but in Spanish, the conversation was around the iPhone or Alexa or Terminator kind of conversation. It was not about the important things. So that's where we decided to start developing these tools in Spanish and to generate awareness about the potential benefits, but also the potential risk or the great risk this technology could have. These resources include not only, as we call it, knowledge products or general documents, but also some specific tools that can complement tools as the ones Rebecca presented before me. All these tools are open to the public and are free to use. So if you look for FAIR like in a box, you can find it. And what do we have there? We have an ethical evaluation for governments and for entrepreneurs. It's like an impact assessment kind of thing that you start answering some questions in a form, and it gives you recommendations and red flags. So, and it's an ex-ante type of tool. As soon as you're going to start using the model, you can do the self-evaluation, and it's for governments or for entrepreneurs. We have as well a manual for project managers. So those team leaders that are in the process of designing or implementing an ADS and wanted to know how to manage a multi-level team. There's a manual with checklists and step by step what that project manager can do. And that it's complemented with a manual for the technical team, the developers that are starting to create the model. It's in R, it's in our GitHub, and it's open, and you can run the code there, and you can see, and it will give you some red flags as well. So to see if your model it's biased in some way, and it's very interesting to start seeing what you can do with those tools. And we have also a massive online open course on how to use artificial intelligence responsibly in the public sector. As Rebecca was saying, one of the important things, or one of the key things, is awareness and education, training. And training not only for entrepreneurs, but for the policymakers. We need governments and the industry talking the same language. If we don't talk the same language, we're not getting anywhere. So we need to start in the same page. And let me give you some examples on how these tools are being used in Latin America and the Caribbean. I already told you about the Uruguayan example, but we have another that is, I think it's really cool. It's in Mexico, it's in Jalisco. So diabetic retinopathy, and I'm sorry if it's a very mouthful word, and you can tell my accent, so it's a chronic and progressive disease that is the major source of adult blindness in Mexico. And its early detection is crucial. It's one of these diseases that if you get it really early, you can avoid getting blind or lose your sight. But it's hard. It's hard to see because you need the image of the deeper eye, the image of an eye, and with a lot of accuracy. So what we did with the Tecnológico de Monterrey, which is a big university in Mexico, and the government of Jalisco, and an entrepreneur that was developing the model, was we were able to take the image of the eye, send it to a validation center, and there, with the help of AI and a doctor, because this is very important, as Rebecca was saying, having a human in the decision-making process is key, we were able to detect the level of risk of that person getting the diabetic retinopathy. 70% of the cases were early detections. So it went great. And that is becoming a public policy within the state of Jalisco, and we hope it's going to scale in Latin America, in the rest of Mexico. So this is a great example of things that could done in a good way when thinking and applying all the tools that we were saying. In Ecuador, for example, the admission process or the way you give the slots to school to some kids, it's very cumbersome and it's not very transparent, to say the least. So for a lot of parents, they weren't aware on how the schools were chosen. So we developed an algorithm and a model with the government and with a UK-based entrepreneurs or company to start allocating in a better way and be able to explain to parents how the decision was made. And it's implementing right now. We are conducting an impact evaluation on that, so I will let you know the results pretty soon. But I think it's a really great example. And there's another one, and this is the last one I want to give you, as a regional example, that we are working with AWS on an open innovation challenge to identify, pilot, and accelerate technology solutions based on artificial intelligence that could close gender gaps. We are aware of we don't want the imbalances of the analog world to get embedded into the digital world. So we are working on gender and sex gaps. So these solutions, we hope that will help with, or through algorithm justice, to reduce bias and discrimination based on sex and gender. This is a great example on how we are using AWS, some tools with these entrepreneurs. We're going to use SageMaker, SageMaker Clarity, Code Whisperer, all the tools that they have developed to help the entrepreneurs in getting their solutions up and running in an ethical and a responsible way. So what is the, and I'm a policymaker, I work in a government institution, so it's important for me. What is the governmental role in all of this? What is happening with the policymaker side? I'm sure, and I hope it's happening. No, I think it's happening. We are working with a lot of governments, but I think it has to be done in a more speedy way. Governments must ensure and work to create the governance infrastructure needed for hold accountable the bad actors, the ones that are not using the system in a good way, and to ensure that actors that have good intent are being recognized or are being using in a good way, that the systems, the ADS systems, are ethical, are legal, or are safe. A lot of the governments are creating guidelines and codes of ethics and ensuring the correct implementation, enforcement of those guidelines. And Chris is going to tell you a little bit about what is happening in the other side of the world with this. But in Latin America and the Caribbean, policymakers are starting to have the courage and being encouraged to ask questions about how the technology is constructed and used. And yesterday, the session about trustworthy AI had a great message. I really like the message at the end that was responsibility is a thing, it's a collective action thing. We need all of us to be in this together. The civil society asking the right questions, the entrepreneurs and the developers doing the right things, the policymakers working with that, the big industry ensure that this is not AI washing, as the greenwashing and AI washing, that is happening really. So Latin American and the Caribbean countries are on the path to developing ethical and trustworthy AI systems, but a lot of work is yet to be done. So these kind of spaces are great to start talking about it. So as my pin said, I speak Spanish, so muchas gracias. And with that, I would give the floor to Chris that would talk to you about the other side of the world.
Thank you, Christina. So those, right. Thank you, Christina. My name is Chris Howard, as Rebecca said. I run our technology organization for AI and machine learning across Asia Pacific and Japan. So I have the pleasure and the honor of managing a team of deep technical experts that take time with our customers every day, focusing on the leverage, using AI and machine learning across APJ, Korea, Japan, ASEAN, New Zealand, Australia, and India. Let's talk about Australia. So, any Australians in the house? Not that I can see you, but one here. Awesome. Go Australia. We're going to talk about a framework that was actually established in 2019 by the Australian federal government, and it's got some unique dimensions to it that I wanted to call out and emphasize today. So, you've just seen that in the previous sessions there was actually a couple of references to governance and organizations around the world actually creating their own ethical principles. If you go and look, there are probably hundreds at this point of references to what various governments are doing. Even the Pope has got his own set of ethical principles when it comes to AI, so there's plenty of them out there. In Australia, the government, back in 2019, November 2019, actually published what is the Australian AI ethics framework. And it actually, interestingly, covers many of the same aspects to responsible AI that we saw called out Rebecca's slides as far as how do we go to market, how do we engage with our customers. It's a voluntary framework, so at this point it is not mandated, it's not something that needs to necessarily be implemented. But one of the interesting things about this framework is it has, of the 8 principles that it has the 7th one around contestability. And it's not unique, but it certainly is rare when you look at the other sets of principles that have been proposed and put in place globally around the world. Many of the others you'll recognize, very common things that you see across many of the various frameworks from different organizations, different governments, but it specifically talks to contestability. So when we get to contestability, there's one part of this, the definition is when AI systems significantly impact, and that's an important term, a person, a community, group, or environment, there should be a timely process to allow people to challenge the use or the outcomes of the AI system. This is an interesting dimension. This is for those that we're serving, for those people that are actually the subject of the AI system or the automated decision system, there should be knowing that things inevitably will go wrong. There needs to be some system that allows us to challenge that decision. I'm sure we'd all be pretty happy to know that that was the case. And in fact, if you were successful in challenging that system, you'd have a mechanism that would allow you to override, to redress what has actually been decided, for you to provide the right, potentially the right compensation, depending on the impact of the incorrect decision, but also to learn from that process, to actually reapply that. And so it's not unique globally, but it's certainly something that is not seen on a regular basis and is often taken as an afterthought. And one of the things that you'll probably recognize as you read through this example is this is not about technology. This is very much not about applying a tool, applying a piece of technology to actually address for this problem. This is a people and process challenge. In many cases, this is actually a function that an organization needs to provide to make this a reality. And so when we look at contestability, especially when it's applied to automated decision systems, we think about the improved outcome that might provide. So if we provide a legitimate way for those that the AI system is serving to contest that decision, to actually have a capability to do that, then there's a procedural fairness in place. People actually believe maybe fairer outcomes are possible. If I don't like what I've been told, I can contest it. I can actually push back and ask for you to rethink that decision in some way. There's an improved perception of fairness. So having outcome control allows us to correct and appeal the decision. And therefore, the fairness of that system is actually more appropriate to those that we're serving. And there's also this improved view around impartiality. The system is not just improved outcome, improved fairness, but also getting to this notion of it's impartial. It treats me in a respectful way, and it's impartial. It doesn't change or bias its decision based on something maybe they shouldn't be using to drive that decision-making process. It's impartial. It's not being biased or informed else in a different way. To achieve on that, it is very much a function. And many of the organizations that we're working with, that requires a mindset shift. Many organizations see AI and machine learning as a technology function. We really want them to think of it as an organizational capability, something that is at the heart of how they operate, part of the DNA or the fabric of how they do business on a daily basis. Building responsible AI into the way that they operate requires the kind of framework that Rebecca was mentioning earlier on. But what we want to do as we're building this function is actually to recognize that there's a life cycle to the decision making that's been made. So before you've even thought about how you fully implement this system, maybe you need to go through an independent review. Maybe you need a third party that will actually come and talk to you about what are you trying to achieve? Who are you serving? Who are your stakeholders? Are there groups, minorities, subgroups within the stakeholder base that you should be aware of? And you need to be thinking about how do you treat them fairly, equitable outcomes. So that third party might come along and might look at what you're proposing to do. They might look at any underlying assumptions you're making and essentially set you up for longer term success. We then might have our own due diligence. So within any territory, within any framework, especially if you're working in a regulated industry, there are certain things that you're abiding to. They're kind of table stakes. The law of the land essentially is where you need to begin. You don't go any lower than that, but then you might apply some additional local jurisdiction or governments on top of that to get to the point where you've done some due diligence, and you're also applying a framework, a consistent approach to address for some of these challenges in the way that you build your system. And then during decision making, we may want to put in place this ability to drive real-time oversight and assurance that actually the process we've set up is being abided by. We're actually delivering on the expectations of the system and aligned to our independent review and aligned to the due diligence we've put in place. We're guaranteeing as we go through the decision-making process that we still are delivering on congruent decisions based on what we've set up. Now, as good as that may be, things will go wrong. There's still a law of averages. We still make mistakes. We're all fallible. Systems obviously amplify our biases and the way that we tend to think. And so we need a mechanism that allows us to audit and review what's gone wrong. We need a mechanism for those that are being served to actually flag it and actually ensure that we learn from that process as we review what has been done and actually get to the point where we can correct for that next time and we can address or redress the individual that's been incorrectly served. We have an example of that with one of the government systems that was put in place in Australia that had actually been capturing some very small and very weak signals from those that were being served through their call centers. And actually, because those signals are very weak and the call center staff maybe weren't quite as trained in the area of response. They perhaps didn't have the full knowledge of how this system worked and some of the complexities of it. They were actually challenging those that were calling and saying, no, we don't think it's a problem. We think this is a good, it's not a good outcome, but it's certainly a correct outcome. And we'd like you to proceed with the action that this particular government department had put forward. Unfortunately, they weren't able to listen to those signals. And they didn't have a mechanism that would allow to actually go and redress and to correct for that. And so what we're finding is, again, this is not about having a set of technologies, it's actually about enabling people, about driving awareness of what are the challenges of implementing a responsible AI system, and then having this contestability function that in many cases for lots of organizations is actually just part of their existing governance, risk, and compliance function. It's not the AI team, it's not the technology team, it's actually your existing risk or compliance team that should be addressing this. And if the clicker would work, I'll get to the next slide. Establishing the threshold for significant impact. So I mentioned as part of the definition for contestability, there was the actual, if we'd reached that point of significant impact, we should allow for redress or contestability. So that really comes down to your ability to risk assess. So there's the organization's risk appetite. What are they actually prepared or willing to, what type of risk are they keen to pursue or to retain? What's their risk attitude? So how do they feel about risk? Organizations approach risk in different ways. Some look to retain risk. They're okay with it. They're happy. Some take the view of turning away from risk or trying to mitigate that risk. At the same time, you need a risk management framework, something like the ISO 3100, which is a consistent framework that actually gives them many of the capabilities, many of the functions that are necessary to actually be able to go off and implement something like a contestability function in their organization. So all part of, again, not part of the technology culture of what you're doing within your organization, very much part of the people and process and having a mindset shift in that space. And this really is it's a repeating cycle. We monitor, we review and report these systems are working to ensure that we have those feedback loops. We have this ability to bring decisions, whether they be correct or incorrect, review those, audit those, and actually reapply that thinking back into the process. So if you're looking to establish a contestability function, it's having the right leadership support in place, because again, it's about changing the way that you operate today. It's not about buying into a technology. It's about empowering your teams, so that they're sufficiently resourced, and they can access the right kind of data to know that this is still a challenge. Clarity and agreement on your mandate, your scope, and when it is appropriate to apply this function in the organization. You need to make sure that you've got an open reporting culture, really important to ensure that it's actually okay for people to raise their hand or speak up to say, look, this isn't right, we need to address this, we need to do something about it. And then obviously review that on an ongoing basis. It's not something that's going to go away. Hopefully we improve the way in which our systems are working, but there will still be the chance, unfortunately, of things going wrong. And so this is not something that you do once and forget about. This is something that you need to do continuously as you go forward. So that was, I guess, the current state of things in Australia. Contestability, one dimension to that function. And there's a little bit of a stick and there's a little bit of a carrot to that model. Some of you know that in the EU, there's actually a proposal in place right now with the EU government, which, if written into law, when they finally ratify this proposal, will actually create a framework in Europe around very much a risk-based framework that actually enforces certain rules around the use of AI. And so in a very similar effect to what we saw from GDPR when that became extraterritorial, we're going to see quite quickly, once the EU actually ratify this law, and it is put into law across all EU member states, we'll probably see that others will probably follow suit in a similar way. And essentially what they're doing is they're banning certain very high or unacceptable risk use cases. So things like, and it's not for all types of these use cases, but certainly for certain types of facial recognition, that's right. For dark patterns, for social manipulation, those types of use cases banned outright. High risk, things like critical systems, transportation systems, education access, border control, the justice system. Unlimited risk, limited risk, specific transparency requirements around things like chatbots, emotions, affect detection. Again, based on the use case, potentially banned or at least governed in a far stricter way. And so we'll see this proposal change the landscape. The policy landscape will change fairly quickly. I think we'll see others around the world adapt to this and try and drive towards a similar approach. And I think this is definitely a stick that the EU are driving. We would prefer that organizations did the right thing in the right way for the right reasons, the carrot. I think this is going to be the stick, and we'll see quite a lot of change over the next 6 to 12 months as organizations realize there's actually fairly significant financial penalties if you don't do this right. So some views of the future. I'm actually going to ask Rebecca and Christina to join me back on the stage.
Offline. I have put up some other responsible AI sessions that are happening tomorrow and Thursday. Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate you being here. Enjoy your reInvent, and thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you to Christina for joining us.
Thank you, Chris. No, thank you for inviting me. Bye.